Chapter 1. February 14, 1863. General George Dalton found the atmosphere in Windsor stifling after a lifetime in active service. Unlike many of his contemporaries, the general had not bought his commissions, he had earned them on bloody battlegrounds and foreign fields. Born the son of a parson, Dalton had begun his military career with the 7th Dragoon Guards before transferring into HM 22nd Foot as a captain. He had seen action during the conquests of Sind and Mini before being promoted to Major General at the outbreak of the Crimean War. Dalton believed himself well liked by the men under his command, and they proved him right, following him into the most unforgiving of conflicts and administering one hell of a toweling to the Russians. His weary and wounded body was invalided home in 1855 to receive a promotion to general. But Dalton firmly believed he belonged at war. Life during peacetime was no life at all for a soldier. Having to remain at court in this funeral atmosphere was more like a living death. Raised voices and colourful expletives were forbidden, let alone the clash of bullets and bayonets. Dalton longed for action, his spirit sorely tried by these past weary weeks. He had come to Windsor to receive the Queen's thanks for his past services, but she had been taken by his manner, saying it was reminiscent of her late much-missed husband. So Dalton found himself trapped in this graveyard of ghouls, everyone hanging on Her Majesty's words. The woman needed to be brought out of herself, that was all. Mourning the loss of a loved one was all very well, but the Queen seemed to wallow in her own misery, Dalton told himself. He would never express such sentiments out loud. His loyalty to the throne was implacable, but how he hungered for relief from this place. When the strangers arrived, it was a blessing of sorts, but the general was still uneasy about their presence. Assassins had tried and happily failed to take the Queen's life before. Surely it was better any visitors of unknown background be approved before being given an audience with Her Majesty. Dalton paused before a mirror to adjust his dress uniform. The golden sash across his chest gleamed against the vibrant fabric of the red tunic, a row of medals firmly affixed above his heart. The general's ruddy face confirmed his rude health, the old wounds long since healed. He fancied there was the hint of a twinkle in his eye. At last, it felt as though the game was afoot once more. Satisfied, Dalton resumed walking, the scabbard of his sword slapping heavily against his left leg as he strode confidently forwards, back erect, chin up, every inch the fearsome warrior. Yes, if any assassins tried to get past Old Blood and Guts, they would have quite a job on their hands. Ahead, he could see the double doors leading into the Queen's office, 2 servants standing either side of the entranceway, each wearing a black armband of mourning. Dalton raised an imperious eyebrow at the servants. "Well, what are you waiting for? Announce me." Sir Henry Ponsonby appeared from the shadows, catching the general off guard. The Queen's private secretary was light of foot and unobtrusive, qualities essential in royal service. "Ah, General, there you are. Her Majesty is occupied with visitors at present, and thus cannot see you." Dalton was having none of that. "It's about these visitors I wish to see her." Sir Henry smiled thinly. "For now, she wishes to interview them herself." "Damn it, man, this is most irregular. The Queen has appointed me as her personal adviser on matters of household security, but refuses to let me do my job. How, pray tell, am I supposed to protect Her Majesty from herself?" The general's voice was rising in volume, a symptom of his increasing frustration. Whitehall and its monarch would be better served by military men rather than the black-suited rabble of self-important obsequious civilians represented by the likes of Ponsonby. "Please, General, I must ask you to respect Her Majesty's wishes in this matter." "What about my men?" "What about them?" I received a dispatch last night saying more than 24 have been sent to make camp in Scotland. Perhaps you'd care to explain to me how such an order was given without my knowledge or consent. Her Majesty commanded it, the private secretary said. Do you question her right as ruler of the British Empire to command the forces of that empire? Of course not. Deuce man, why must you twist everything I say? I simply wish to know how and, more importantly, why this has happened. Dalton bristled with exasperation, his cheeks becoming redder by the moment. Her Majesty received word of a significant discovery in the area to which your troops, your men, as you put it, have been dispatched. She directed an exploratory force be placed in the region to safeguard against any enemy action. Enemy action? In Scotland? For the love of God, from where is this enemy action expected to come? Ponsonby shrugged. I made the same points to Her Majesty as you have made to me, but her resolve was implacable. Now, if you please, General, I must get back inside. When the Queen is ready for you, I will have one of the pages sent with a summons immediately. The private secretary withdrew, leaving Dalton fuming in the corridor. Damn and blast the woman, and damn and blast her underlings too. The general stomped away down the corridor. Well, there was more than one way to outwit an enemy. Dalton felt certain his officers would be more forthcoming with news of what was so special about this mission. Nobody commandeered his men without showing him due deference. Another thought occurred to him. Perhaps Scotland Yard might have some fresh intelligence on potential threats to the Queen's safety. Yes, perhaps a letter to the Commissioner. Baroness von Luckner adjusted the collar of her ward's shirt, making sure it lay flat against his jacket. She brushed a dark comber of hair from the young man's eyes and stepped back to admire him. The Baroness had spent the last of her savings preparing for this royal audience, and now the day had come. She could not stop herself from fussing. James kept trying to slap her hand away, but his protests were silenced by a harsh rap across the knuckles. Luckner did not require her cane to walk, but she found the sterling silver handle a useful device for keeping Lees in line. "Now, do you know what to say?" she hissed at him. They were waiting in an antechamber to see the Queen, unobserved and alone for the first time since entering the grounds of Windsor Castle. "That I have a message from her beloved." "Exactly. But to deliver that message, I will have to hold a séance." James glared at the woman, annoyance visible in his dark eyes. "We've been over this 12 times. And we will keep going over it until you remember properly. To deliver that message, it will be best to stage a séance, perhaps in the place she feels closest to her beloved." Yes, yes, he said impatiently. "Good. And what else?" James rolled his eyes, but still cowered when the Baroness began drawing back her cane, as if to strike him again. "Don't mention money," Luckner smiled, an action unfamiliar to her harsh, unforgiving face. She was clad all in black as an apparent mark of respect for the Queen's state of mourning. Her greying hair was pulled back into a bun, emphasizing the severity of her features. For now, the Baroness could control her ward. She knew such circumstances would not last much longer. That was why she had pushed for the royal audience now. The doors to the Queen's office swung open, revealing Sir Henry Ponsonby inside. "Her Majesty will see you now." The Baroness bobbed her head in thanks before walking forwards, leaning heavily on the cane. The Queen's private office was a large chamber, exquisitely decorated and adorned with fine paintings and statues. Light flooded in from arched windows, helping to illuminate the high ceilings. Servants remained beside each doorway, while 2 ladies-in-waiting flanked the Queen. Victoria was seated behind an ornate table, its surface cluttered with papers, ink pots containing liquids of different hues, and other paraphernalia. But the most imposing and compelling aspect of the room was its owner. The Queen was bent intently over a letter, her chubby fingers clutching a dull-nibbed pen as she scrawled in a spidery hand. Her hair was hidden by a black silk bonnet, just an edging of white providing any contrast. Her pale face was round, almost heart-shaped, with little of the rouge fashionable in some circles. Her figure was swathed in more black, sleeves extending down to her wrists. Finally, Victoria looked up and regarded the two visitors. Her features betrayed little. Indeed, she seemed to be holding herself in check, as if waging some inner battle with her own emotions. "So," she began, and then said nothing for fully a minute. "You have come as we requested. Thank you." Luckner had happily taken her ward round most of the royal courts in Europe, but here she felt ill at ease. Partly this was caused by the flutter of fear in her stomach, but another factor was the overpowering stench of mothballs in the room. The Baroness knew her host was not yet 50, but the odour hanging in the chamber spoke of a life already locked away from open air. Finally, the Baroness broke the silence, bobbing in a slight curtsy as she spoke. "It was our pleasure, ma'am. Indeed, we felt it was our duty." "Quite." The Queen swallowed heavily, then took a sip of water from a crystal tumbler. One of her ladies-in-waiting refilled the glass from a matching decanter before stepping back into place behind the monarch. "We understand you have a message?" "Indeed, ma'am." The Baroness indicated James at her side. "My young ward is a gifted medium. Many times he has communicated with the spirit world on behalf of kings, queens, and—" Yes, we know all this," the Queen interrupted testily. "What is the message?" Luckner began protesting as best she could, determined the encounter should proceed as she had imagined it. "Excuse me, Your Majesty, but he—" James had other ideas and cut her off abruptly. "Albert," the young man said, stepping towards the Queen's desk. "It was Albert." There was a gasp of astonishment from the court attendants at the boy's temerity. Victoria looked just as shocked, but quickly composed herself. "If you mean our late husband, we would prefer it if you addressed him by his proper title. The royal consort, Prince Albert," she snapped back. James responded with a brief nod. "Forgive me, Your Majesty. I did not wish to speak out of turn. You see—" The Baroness stepped to James's side, trying to keep some semblance of control. "You see, Master James Lees is—" The Queen silenced Lucknow with a baleful glare before turning her attention back to the young man. She gave him a brief smile of encouragement. "You were saying?" "The royal consort, Prince Albert, has spoken through me on at least 2 occasions, Your Majesty," James replied. "At first I did not recognize the spirit who took control of me. It was only when I was received by the Crown Princess of Prussia the discovery was made." "Yes, our daughter wrote about your remarkable gift," the Queen said. "Her letter quite moved us. She wrote how you were able to mimic our beloved husband's voice in a most uncanny manner. We also received a letter from your guardian about your abilities, along with further information." "If Your Majesty will permit me," Luckner interjected, still determined not to be shut out of this discussion, "my ward is no mimic. He speaks in the tongues of the dearly departed. If you will, he becomes their earthly vessel." "Thank you," the Queen snapped back, not bothering to look at the Baroness. "We do understand the concept of mediumship. Pray do not see fit to interrupt us again." These last words were spoken with a lightness of tone, but the underlying threat was quite evident. Luckner realized she had overreached herself. Whatever happened next, she could not speak again until invited to do so. It would be up to the boy to carry this off. "The Crown Princess recognized the spirit speaking through me. She said so during the course of a séance, and was able to converse with your late husband, the royal consort Prince Albert." James announced this as if it were utterly matter of fact, the sort of thing that happened to him every day. "We are intrigued," the Queen admitted. "You say these spirits, as you call them, possess you? They control you? Are you aware of what you are saying and doing? Do you remember what happens afterwards?" "I have a complete recollection of these episodes, Your Majesty. As for an awareness, it is as if I were dreaming and awake at the same time. I feel my spirit drift away from my body until it floats in the air overhead. I look down on what is happening, observing it all. I can see my own body below me, but it talks with the voices of those who have passed over to the other side. When the séance comes to an end, the visiting spirits leave my body, and I am drawn back down into this mortal shell." "Most remarkable," the Queen replied. She began to push back her chair, a lady in waiting quickly stepping forward to remove it. Victoria walked around the table to stand nearer James, but maintained a safe distance from her visitors. "As you probably know, the loss of our beloved husband has been a bitter blow for the nation, as well as for our family," the Queen said. "We would be most displeased should any charlatan attempt to trade upon that sorrow." James bowed his head respectfully. "Your Majesty, I have no wish to obtain any pecuniary advantage from this audience. My motives are simple and honourable, to serve Your Majesty in any way you see fit, and to act as conduit for the spirit world to speak with those still on this side." The Queen nodded, apparently satisfied. "What is this message?" "Your Majesty, the royal consort made mention of portals between this mortal plane and the spirit world. I believe I may have already been through one such portal when I was still just a boy. My guardian, Baroness von Luckner, sent you details of its location in her letter. It was upon returning from that hallowed place that I became a medium for the departed, their conduit on earth. We have dispatched a contingent of troops to investigate and guard this site. We expect a report from our expeditionary force shortly. What else?" "The rest is difficult, Your Majesty." James stared down at the elaborately stitched rug on the floor of the chamber. "How so, Master Lees?" "I communicate best during a séance. If you would be willing to take part in such an endeavour, I might hope to tell you more." This suggestion created a flurry of looks and glances among the others in the room, but the Queen did not flinch. "Where does one suggest we hold this séance?" "Wherever you feel closest to your dearly departed," James replied without hesitation. "It is not for me to stipulate such a location. You know it best yourself." Victoria pursed her lips. "Our husband rests in the beloved mausoleum at Frogmore. We visit him there daily. Would that be a suitable place?" "Undoubtedly. The hours of twilight are best for contacting the spirit world." "So be it," the Queen announced. "Tonight we will adjourn to the mausoleum, and a séance shall be held. But we must warn you." With this, Victoria fixed a steely gaze upon the Baroness's face. "No word of what occurs in that place may ever be spoken of, nor written. No other living soul can ever know what happens there. Is that perfectly clear?" Luckner dropped into another curtsy, avoiding the monarch's eyes. The Queen turned away and strode back to her chair. "You may go. We shall summon you at the appointed hour." Victoria sat down and returned to her correspondence. Sir Henry Ponsonby slipped forwards unobtrusively and began guiding the visitors out. Within moments, they were back in the antechamber, alone again. The Baroness let out a relieved gasp. She smiled at the young man, for once the emotion genuine on her face. "Well done. That went better than I could have imagined." James just stared at her, his features sour and pinched. His voice suddenly took on a menace and timbre unlike any it had displayed before. "You fool! You almost destroyed my hopes with your incompetent bumbling. Never, never interrupt me again. Do I make myself clear? Luckner stepped back in surprise. Yes, of course. Then the moment passed, as if a cloud had moved over the young man's face. He collapsed to the floor in a crumpled heap, blood trickling from his nostrils. Sergeant Charles Otto Vollmer looked down in wonder at the valley. He had travelled to foreign lands and seen vistas both remarkable and terrifying, but he had never laid eyes upon such an unlikely sight. Below was an incongruous assemblage of buildings clustered in parallel arcs beside the River Clyde. Nearest the water's edge, the 4 tallest buildings stood end to end in a row, probably the cotton mills, Vollmer thought. Each structure was 5 stories high, with sandstone walls of 2 different hues and the dark grey slate roofs characteristic of this region in Scotland. Further back from the river were 2 parallel rows of tenement blocks, homes for the people of this community. The sergeant could see the lines of washing hung out between the windows. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this working village was how new everything looked. It appeared to have been purpose-built within the last 100 years and well looked after, unlike the haphazard homes and cobbled streets of Whitechapel in East London, where Vollmer had been brought up. There, a dense pall of smoke hung in the air, always accompanied by the stench of human excrement sluicing down the gutters. By comparison, this place smelled clean and fresh, a brisk breeze hurrying up the sides of the valley from the river. The steep hills were thick with leafless trees, the harsh winter having denuded much of the surrounding forest. February was not a month the sergeant would have chosen to make camp in such a place, but orders were orders. The contingent had set forth several days earlier from Aldershot, travelling into London before taking the train north to Scotland. The journey had been a fractured stop-start affair. Finally, the men had been forced back on foot for the last miles. Lieutenant Reginald Ashe appeared beside Vollmer on the hillside overlooking the village. "Remarkable, isn't it?" the lieutenant said cheerfully. He was several years younger than the sergeant, but still outranked him, thanks to a rich family. Ashe's commission had been purchased for him once the horrors of the Crimean War had passed. While Vollmer had been earning his rank in mud-strewn trenches outside Sebastopol, young Ashe had been playing sport on the fields of Eton. All the boyish enthusiasm in the world wouldn't keep Ashe alive for long, if he ever saw combat, the sergeant had decided. He was developing a healthy contempt for the lieutenant, but kept such feelings to himself. It didn't do to get on the wrong side of officers. They would just take it out on you in other ways. "Yes, sir," Vollmer replied. "Can't say as I've seen anything like it before." "Quite." Ashe looked about himself. "Well, where do you think we should make camp for the night? How about down in the village itself?" The sergeant shook his head slowly. "I don't think so, sir." Ashe appeared crestfallen. "Why ever not? Looks like a lovely sort of place, very friendly and welcoming. Be good to get a night's sleep in a proper bed." "Indeed, sir, but maintaining discipline with the men is easier when they have fewer distractions. A village full of comely young female mill workers is also likely to be a village full of temptations, if you follow my meaning." Yes, I see what you're suggesting." Ashe rubbed a thumb across his chin. "So then, where do you suggest?" "Perhaps if we find a sheltered site up here in the hills for now. It'll be dark within an hour, so the sooner we make camp the better. Tomorrow we can move upstream to the falls and establish a more permanent presence," Vollmer advised. "Righto! I say, this is proving to be quite an adventure, isn't it?" The sergeant smiled as best he could before replying. "Yes, sir. Well, if you'll excuse me, I'll fall the men in and get them to work on making camp." "Good show. I'm going to venture into the village and make contact with the natives. The last thing they'll be expecting is a contingent of Her Majesty's finest settling in the hills above them. Best I give the head man some idea of why we're here." Volmer seized this opportunity to put a question of his own for once. Why exactly are we here, sir? Dashed if I know. I simply received word to establish a presence beside the Falls of Clyde. Once we're in place, I got sealed orders to open about our next task. Apparently we can expect additional equipment within a day or two. Ash shrugged. Other than that, your guess is as good as mine. Probably better, the sergeant thought. Very good, sir. Well, I'll go see to the men. Right-ho! Volmer gritted his teeth, snapped to attention, and gave a precise salute before marching away. Right-ho? What in God's name were they teaching officers these days? The sooner somebody outlawed the purchasing of commissions, the better. Extract from Observations and Analysis, a journal. Precise landings of the TARDIS are not always to be relied upon, except for their tendency to evoke some perverse irony. Indeed, the Doctor's ability to pilot this vehicle through time and space is almost as erratic as the machine itself. Getting the TARDIS to land at a particular locus can either be simplicity itself or an almost unobtainable goal. From the moment Tegan stepped on board, she wanted to get back to London in 1981, but it took a temporal anomaly to achieve that. It was a surprise to both herself and the Doctor when we accidentally arrived at Heathrow, precisely where we had been trying to go. Having recently left that site, we found ourselves on course for almost the same point in space, if not time, when the Doctor set materialization coordinates. Remarkable, he said. We won't be more than a few miles from Heathrow, at least from the site of what will be Heathrow Airport. But you would have a long wait to catch the next plane. Why? What year is it? I asked. 1863, February 14 to be exact, about 6 in the evening locally. Valentine's Day. I did not know to what this referred. The Doctor explained it was the feast day of a saint, a religious individual from the past who was considered to have been especially holy. During the 20th century, this feast day would become a special day of celebration among some Earth cultures for those in love. People would send each other cards and flowers, often anonymously, to express their love for each other, the Doctor said. Why anonymously? It was a tradition of the time. Rather an odd one. Why tell someone of your love for them without revealing who you are? It makes no sense. Much like this garb. The Doctor had suggested I change into something more appropriate for the period. The more skin you can conceal, the better. The Victorians could be rather prudish. I had tried several floor-length dresses and finally settled on an all-encompassing gown of dark cloth. For reasons defying understanding, the makers had sewn animals' bones into the garment as if determined to torture the wearer by a slow but inexorable crushing of her ribs. Selecting a pair of simple shoes in a matching colour, I made my way back to the control room. Getting through the doorways had proved a struggle, due to all the extra layers of cloth fitted beneath my dress, until I hit upon the notion of turning sideways. I asked the Doctor if these Victorians had wider doorways than those fitted inside the TARDIS. Indeed they did. Wider doors, corridors and stairways, higher ceilings, among those who could afford such things. The Doctor finished a few last tweaks of the central console's many switches and dials, then removed his half-frame spectacles to regard my clothes. Very good. You will be quite the lady in that. Most becoming. What about you? Are your clothes appropriate for the period? The Doctor examined his own attire. What? These old things? No need to worry. It's one of the joys of being a Time Lord. Somehow people never seem to question what I'm wearing. Carry yourself with the right degree of authority, and I find you can talk yourself out of any difficulty. Only after talking us into it first, I thought, but kept the opinion to myself. So, why do I have to wear this? In 1863, most women were seen but not heard. Only most. Well, you haven't met Queen Victoria. And you have? That's a good question. When you've travelled to as many times and places as I have, keeping track of them all can be rather a challenge. By now, the central column was juddering to a halt. The doctor gave a broad smile as he made a few last-minute adjustments. Here we go. The cortege made its way slowly from Windsor Castle to the gardens of nearby Frogmore House, travelling towards the estate's long walk. A pair of guards on horseback led the procession, followed by a series of carriages containing the Queen, members of her retinue, Dalton, and the two visitors. The general insisted on travelling in the same barouche as Her Majesty, so he was best placed to react if anything untoward should happen. He kept a loaded pistol by his side at all times when in the presence of the Queen. There had been at least 2 assassination attempts that were public knowledge, and Dalton believed only further vigilance would prevent some other assailant being more successful. James Lees and Baroness von Luckner travelled in the last carriage, another pair of guards following on horseback. The Baroness was enjoying the fresh air after being stifled by the stale corridors within the castle. One of the Queen's maids was travelling with them as a chaperone, preventing the Baroness from issuing any final instructions to her ward. They had travelled together for more than a year, but Luckner felt certain there would soon be a parting of the ways. James was becoming increasingly resistant to supervision, challenging her authority in ways she could not have imagined just months before. It was difficult to reconcile this behaviour with the child she had first encountered 2 Decembers ago. The carriage began to slow as the driver tugged on his reins. The wooden wheels skidded on the gravel path before coming to a halt. A footman jumped from the rear of the vehicle and opened the right-hand door, folding down the stairs and offering his assistance to the occupants. The Baroness went first, followed by James and the Queen's maid. In the gloaming, it was difficult to discern their surroundings, but Luckner could make out a protective scattering of trees, masking the mausoleum from the long walk. A corner of the building was just visible ahead, where servants bearing lanterns were lighting the way for the royal party. The visitors were ushered forward to join the others. When it came fully into view, the mausoleum was an impressive sight, although not yet complete. A copper dome glinted above the structure, its metal surface just catching the last light in the sky. The outer walls of stone and granite melted into the twilight, barely illuminated by the lanterns lining the pathway. The Queen reached the empty doorway to the building and stopped, waiting for James and his guardian to join her. Once they had, she spoke to them in hushed, reverential tones. "Within these walls lies our beloved husband and consort. The mausoleum is still being finished, but we long for the day when we may join him here," she said before venturing inside. Within, the walls of red marble were inlaid with similar stone of other colourings. The Queen paused just inside the entrance, her eyes closed, lips silently mouthing a phrase. She became aware of the others waiting for her. "We were reciting the words that shall be inscribed above the door. Farewell, best beloved. Here at last I shall rest with thee in Christ I shall rise again." The general stepped forward to address the Queen. "Your Majesty, one of the side chapels has been prepared, just as you requested." Victoria nodded, and let him lead those gathered to one of the wings branching off the main chamber. There waited a round table, a black silk cloth over its surface, and a small vase of freshly cut flowers standing in the centre. 6 chairs were placed evenly around it, a handful of candles illuminating the scene. The Queen turned to James and smiled at him. "We place ourselves in your hands, young man." James nodded and guided her to one of the chairs, then stood behind the opposite chair. The Baroness took her position to his left, while James invited any others from the royal party who wished to participate to occupy the remaining places. Dalton politely refused to be involved, saying he needed to maintain a good watch. Instead, 2 ladies-in-waiting and a maid were brought to the table. Once all the places were filled, James bade the Queen to be seated. The others followed her example, nervously pulling their chairs in close to the table. The young man addressed everyone else in the side chamber. "I must ask all others to leave this place and go beyond our hearing. The séance will not succeed if skeptics and unbelievers are present, as they can block spirit influence and communication. This is not a parlour game, nor is it for your entertainment. We gather here seeking answers to specific questions. We must be careful what doors we open." Dalton glowered at James, but soon retreated, leading the others into the main chamber. Once that noise had died away, James fixed his gaze upon those sitting around the table. "Firstly, I want you to relax. Focus on your breathing, taking air in through your nostrils and letting it out through your mouths. Breathe in, count to 3, and then gently let the air escape from you again. That's it. Keep breathing, and as you breathe, think about why we have come here, what we wish to achieve. It is important that as long as the séance continues, we must all remain at this table. None may leave or break the circle. Is that perfectly clear?" The others nodded their agreement. "Good. Now, I want you to lay your hands flat on the table, palms down. Move your hands apart until the small fingers are touching the small fingers of those either side of you. Good. The circle is complete. Remember, no one may leave the circle unless I say so. Close your eyes, and we may begin. Now, I will recite an oath of protection 3 times. You must believe in the oath and the protection it offers." James cleared his throat and closed his own eyes before beginning the recitation. "Ask for the strength and guidance of the white light. Please surround us with your protection." He paused and then repeated the incantation twice. A long silence followed, accompanied by the faintest of zephyrs flickering in the candle flames. "We have begun," James announced, his voice calm and gentle. "I call upon the spirits of my sisters to guide me and provide a conduit between this world and the next. Dearly departed, do you have a message for us?" No reply came, so the young man tried another question. "Please come through to us. Is there someone here you wish to speak to?" Again, no reply. "We are ready for you, dearly departed. Do you have something to—" The Baroness felt James's body spasm and jerk beside her, his fingers tapping repeatedly against the tabletop, his teeth chattering. It was starting. Just as quickly, James's body relaxed and resumed breathing. When he spoke, it was with a voice not his own. "Gute Fragen." The Queen and her ladies-in-waiting gasped. The voice was unmistakably that of the royal consort Prince Albert, whose remains were interred elsewhere in the mausoleum. "Are you there, Gute Fragen?" the voice asked. "I am here," Victoria replied. "Es ist kleine Frauchen." "Wiebchen, I feel how you grieve for me, but there is another way." "What way is this?" "In Christ we shall rise again." "Yes, my beloved, your mortal remains are here now in the mausoleum. Every year we have a service here on the day you passed over, and I pray for the day we may be together again. If you wish it, that day may be soon. We can be reunited, and yet you can still remain with our children." "How, my beloved? How is this possible?" Luckner opened one of her eyes to peek at those around the table. The Queen's face was a mixture of exultation and wonder, her chest rising and falling rapidly. It was strange to hear the Queen refer to herself in the singular instead of the royal we. All pretense, all affectation had been shed. Her attendants seemed just as intent on the moment. As always, James was being swept along by the fervour of those around him. "There is a place where the distance between this life and the next is at its narrowest, where the pull of the spirit world is strong." "Yes, my beloved, I received word about this from our daughter. I sent a contingent of men north to guard this place." James nodded fervently, his eyes still firmly shut. "You have done well, Wiebchen, but you must do more if we are to be reunited in this world. You must open up this gateway and send an envoy to the other side. But you must hurry. Soon my soul will have made the transition, and our chance will have passed." "I understand. Your kleines Frauchen understands, beloved. Guter, you must send this boy back." Suddenly, the mausoleum was filled with an unearthly noise, like the trumpeting of a dozen mechanical elephants and great blocks of granite grinding together. The cacophony reverberated about the walls, terrifying the six at the table. A white light flashed on and off, casting strange shadows across the incomplete stonework and colonnades. "What is it?" the Queen shouted, her hands clasped over her ears. "Did you summon this?" she asked the young man. James could only shake his head. The noise ceased as abruptly as it had begun, leaving just the distant echo of a heavy thump. A second afterwards, the light was gone too. Dalton ran into the side chamber, his pistol drawn, a lantern clasped in his other hand. "Your Majesty, are you safe and well?" "Perfectly so," the Queen replied, quickly composing herself. "What caused that commotion?" "I know not, but I shall soon find out. Please remain here until I return." The general was already leaving to search the rest of the mausoleum. James stood up, ready to follow the old soldier, but the Baroness pulled him back down into his chair. "No, James, you should remain here," she insisted. "Until we know more about what just happened, we should all stay here." The Queen nodded her agreement. "Young man, that was a most remarkable display. We could have sworn we heard our late husband's voice issue from your mouth." "Yes, Your Majesty, it was him speaking. I observed from above as he took control of my body. It was a shame that cacophony broke the lines of communication." James asked that they all hold hands to form a complete energy circle so he could bring the séance to a more satisfactory conclusion. Once the six were in physical contact, the young man let his pupils roll back behind his eyelids and began intoning. "Thank you for all the things you have given us in the past, the present, and the future. Thank you." James opened his eyes again. "It is over." General Dalton found the two intruders first, standing at the entrance to the mausoleum. One was a fair-haired man of indeterminate age, his face without the lines or guile born of experience, but a keen intelligence evident in his eyes. He was clad in a beige frock coat with scarlet trim, striped trousers, a knitted pullover, and a white shirt open at the neck. Curiously, this new arrival had a growth of celery attached to the lapel of his frock coat, and a hat of straw rolled in one hand. His garb was somewhat eccentric, but he presented no obvious threat that the general could see. The other intruder was a young woman of no more than 20 years. Like her companion, she seemed more curious than dangerous, her friendly features dominated by wide, inquisitive eyes and high cheekbones. She was wearing a full-length dress of dark silk, cut in the style Dalton had seen on his infrequent trips into London. He noticed something else about her, an air of self-assurance and an upright posture that suggested an almost regal stature, despite her diminutive height. Plainly, she had been raised among the aristocracy, perhaps even possessed some noble blood. The pair saw Dalton advancing on them, pistol drawn, but neither tried to run or attack. Instead, the man merely sighed while the woman glared at her companion with exasperation. "Why is no one ever pleased to see us, Doctor?" she asked. "Who are you?" the General demanded. He was surprised when the male intruder stepped forward with a smile to give him a firm but friendly handshake, and then perplexed by the answer this interloper offered. "Hello, I'm the Doctor, and this young lady is my friend Nissa of Traken." "I require your full name, sir." "Very well. Smith. Dr. John Smith." "That is better, but we have no need of a physician here." The woman joined their conversation, not waiting to be included. "The doctor is as much a scientist as a healer," she explained. 2 footmen appeared from outside. "General, you should come and see this," one of them called. Dalton ushered his suspects outside, following the footman around a corner of the mausoleum. Standing beside the building was a tall blue object, the words "Police Public Call Box" emblazoned on its side. "What the deuce is that doing here?" the General spluttered. "We arrived in it," the woman called Nissa said. "It's the best way of storing and moving equipment," the doctor interjected, a look passing between him and his companion. "My apologies if the noise from our unscheduled arrival startled you, or anyone else here." Dalton was starting to put the pieces together now. "Is it one of these newfangled telegraphic machines?" "Something like that, yes." "So, you were sent by the police? Scotland Yard, was it?" "You could say that. We're investigating strange phenomena in the area around Windsor Castle, and the trail led us here," the doctor said by way of explanation. Dalton nodded happily. It seemed his communication to the Yard had been acted upon with greater alacrity than he could have imagined. "The doctor believes there is a serious threat to the stability of the space-time continuum centered on this locality," Nissa added helpfully. A sterner looked past to her from the doctor, but the General was already nodding sagely. "I know nothing of this continuum, but any threat to the Queen is serious," he said. "We can never be too vigilant in safeguarding the ruler of our mighty empire." "Quite right, too," the doctor said. "Safety first, that's my policy. Well, perhaps we could move indoors. Night is closing in rather quickly and all that." Dalton replaced his pistol in its holster and led the arrivals back into the mausoleum. "I must say, I am most grateful for any light you can shed on events, Doctor. The claims made by this young man and his guardian, they seem to beggar belief." "Is that so, General?" "Damnably so, yes. The Queen will listen to no counsel, heed no warnings, nor brook any opposition. Perhaps you can help to dissuade her from this course of action." "Well, I will endeavour to do what is best, as always." "Capital, Doctor, capital. I must say, I was taken aback by your sudden appearance and curious garb, but you seem exactly the right sort. A gentleman and a scholar." Nissa cleared her throat conspicuously as they reached the entranceway to the mausoleum again. "Perhaps I could have a few words with my fellow traveller alone?" The General concurred. "I will go ahead and seek a brief audience for you with Her Majesty. If you would be so kind as to wait here." He disappeared inside and found the Queen preparing to leave, accompanied by her attendants, the young man Lys, and his guardian. "Yes, General, what is it?" "Your Majesty, I have located the cause of the disturbance." "Indeed? And what, pray tell, was responsible? And who are those people outside?" "2 visitors, one of them sent by the police at Scotland Yard. They've come to investigate reports of strange phenomena close to the castle." "Intriguing. Have them brought before us." "Yes, Your Majesty." The General turned and beckoned the doctor and Nissa inside. "This gentleman is Dr. John Smith, and his companion is Lady Nissa of Trucken. Extract from Observations and Analysis, a journal. As in most things, the doctor was right about the reception we received upon arrival. A military man was the first we encountered, a bluff individual waving a projectile weapon and asking bluff questions. But the doctor quickly talked his way inside our interrogator's trust, and within minutes we were to be introduced to Queen Victoria. The doctor did his best to school me in the protocol of the time. Never speak until you are spoken to. When you are introduced, curtsy respectfully. Call the Queen Your Majesty when you first speak to her, and Ma'am after that. The General reappeared, waving us forward to meet the Queen. She was surprisingly small of size, but suitably regal, with a tranquil grace and piercing eyes. Behind her were 3 other women, no doubt just a few of her many servants. Off to one side stood an awkward young man and a stern-faced woman. She had a hand clamped on the young man's shoulder in a manner I can only describe as proprietorial. The monarch welcomed us and began to introduce those attending her. Just as she reached the young man, I felt my stomach twist with nausea. Something was wrong, very wrong. I could feel it. Again, the stench of burning sugar assaulted my senses, just as it had done in the TARDIS earlier. I swallowed hard to keep down a surge of bile. "And this young man is James Lees, a gifted psychic," the Queen said grandly. "We have decided to appoint him as our royal medium." That brought mutterings from the attendants and a smile to the stern-faced woman's pinched features. The young man nodded graciously at this honour, then offered his hand to the doctor. "I am very pleased to meet you, sir." "Call me the doctor. Everyone does. This is my travelling companion, Nissa." James shifted his attention to me, and the nausea swept through me again. "You shouldn't worry, Nissa," a voice said. "I'm in a better place now, a happier place. You'll see." I could see James's lips moving, but the voice could only be that of one person. Adric. That must have been when I lost consciousness. Dalton felt the introductions were going well until Lees began talking to Lady Nissa. The lad's voice appeared to change, becoming one the General did not recognise. Lady Nissa and the doctor were plainly shaken by this manifestation, and the young woman fell to the floor in a swoon. She cracked her head against the cold marble underfoot and lay quite still. Lee stumbled back, suddenly unsure of himself. "I'm sorry, I don't know what came over me then. Normally such manifestations only occur in the confines of the séance." The Baroness took hold of her ward and led him aside. Dalton could hear her hissing angrily at the young man. "What do you think you are doing? You've put that poor woman into shock with your antics." "They're not antics," Lees protested quietly. "Told you, I'm losing control of this." Von Luckner noticed the General's close attention to their conversation and said no more, glaring at him. Meanwhile, the doctor was examining Nissa. He picked up a slim notebook that was lying open beside her and pocketed it. "I'm afraid it may be some time before she regains consciousness. Is there somewhere she could be moved to while she recovers?" The Queen took charge of the situation. "You shall return with us to Windsor Castle. We should like to know more about these investigations you mention. Before you arrived, we experienced a strange phenomenon of our own, not dissimilar to that which has laid low Lady Nissa. We should like you to travel back in our carriage." "Most gracious, Your Majesty." The doctor stood up and bowed to the Queen before shifting his gaze to the General. "Perhaps someone could look after the welfare of my companion." "Of course, it shall be seen to at once." Dalton began making the necessary arrangements while listening to the Queen's next words. "Doctor, There is something of kindred spirits about you and Lady Nyssa, as if you have both recently suffered a great loss." "2 losses, Your Majesty," the doctor admitted. "We thought so. You are plainly still haunted by those absences, as we have been mourning our own. We shall have much to talk about." The doctor bowed again. "Your Majesty is too kind." During the carriage journey, Victoria related the evening's events in precise detail. The doctor listened intently, occasionally prompting her with further inquiries. Only when the tale was told did he seek any clarification. "You mentioned the voice of the royal consort, Prince Albert, speaking of a passageway between this world and the next, ma'am. Could you recall for me the precise way he described this place?" The Queen closed her eyes and began slowly to intone the words she had heard during the séance. "There is a place where the distance between this life and the next is at its narrowest, where the pull of the spirit world is strong. You must open up this gateway and send an envoy to the other side. But you must hurry. Soon my soul will have made the transition, and our chance will have passed. You must send this boy back." The Queen opened her eyes again. "That was the last thing our beloved husband said before we were interrupted by your arrival. What will be your next step, Doctor?" "My first concern is the welfare of my companion. Tomorrow I wish to learn more about Master James Lees and his guardian, and the location of this gateway." "A wise course of action. Our private secretary has been determining the validity of Baroness von Luckner's bona fides. We expect his report in the morning." The Queen fell silent again, offering one last comment before they reached their destination. "We are most grateful for your tact and open-minded approach to this matter, Doctor. There are more things in heaven and earth than mere mortal man may understand, Your Majesty. I have learned it is best to approach the unexplained with a fair mind and open eyes. Better to see the truth quickly and pass judgment on it slowly." Victoria nodded in agreement. When they arrived back at the castle, she bade the doctor have a good night's rest and disappeared inside. He waited for the rest of the cortege and then supervised Nyssa's transfer indoors.